Deep beneath the purple mountains of Valdris Prime, where crystals grew like frozen lightning and the air hummed with ancient power, Thyra felt the first tremor shake her massive body. The crystal dragon had not moved from this spot in 300 years. Her golden scales now dulled with cave dust, her once bright eyes focused entirely on the single egg that rested between her front claws. The egg was beautiful beyond words. It looked like someone had captured a piece of the northern lights and shaped it into a perfect oval. Blue and green light swirled beneath its crystalline surface, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Thyra had watched over this egg longer than most civilizations had existed, waiting for the moment when her youngling would finally break free and take its first breath. Another tremor, stronger this time. Small rocks fell from the ceiling of her vast cave, clicking against her horns as they bounced away. Thyra lifted her great head and sniffed the air. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The smell hit her first. Hot metal and burning chemicals, carried on air currents that should not exist so deep underground. Then came sounds she had never heard before in all her centuries of life. Grinding mechanical noises that seemed to come from the very bones of the planet Thyra had been alive when the first space travelers found Valdris Prime. She had watched from her hidden cave as ships landed and strange beings in metal suits walked around on the surface. They had taken rocks and plants, pointed devices at everything, and then left. For decades after that, more ships came and went. Thyra did not mind. The surface world meant nothing to her. Only the egg mattered. But something had changed in recent years. The visitors stayed longer now. They brought bigger machines and dug deeper holes. Sometimes Thyra felt vibrations through the mountain as they worked, but they had never bothered her before. The next tremor was strong enough to crack one of the smaller crystals near the cave entrance. Thyra's protective instincts flared to life. She spread her wings slightly, creating a shelter over the egg, and reached out with her mind to sense what was happening above. What she found made her heart freeze with terror. The humans had not just been digging small holes anymore. They had built enormous machines that burrowed deep into the planet's core, following veins of precious metals and rare crystals. But they had made a terrible mistake. In their greed, they had damaged something that should never be touched. The planet's core was becoming unstable. Thyra could feel it now. Deep below her cave, the very heart of Valdris Prime was beginning to crack apart. Molten rock was starting to move in ways it was never meant to move. The careful balance that had kept this world stable for millions of years was breaking down. The dragon knew what would happen next. First would come the earthquakes, then the volcanoes. The mountain range where she had made her home would be torn apart by forces beyond imagination. Even her ancient cave, protected by crystals that had grown over thousands of years, would not survive. But the egg was so close to hatching. Thyra could sense the youngling inside, growing stronger every day. In perhaps a month, maybe less, her child would break free and see the world for the first time. 300 years of patient waiting would finally be rewarded. She could not wait a month. The planet did not have a month. Thyra tried to think of solutions. She was incredibly strong, capable of lifting massive boulders with ease. Her breath could melt through solid rock. Her magic could reshape crystals and bend metal. But even with all her power, she could not stop an entire planet from tearing itself apart. Could she escape with the egg? Thyra looked toward the cave entrance, measuring the distance with her eyes. The tunnel that led to the surface was wide enough for her to pass through, but barely. And it was a long journey to reach the open air. If she moved quickly, carrying the egg carefully in her claws, she might be able to reach safety before the worst of the destruction began. But another tremor shook the cave, and this time several large rocks fell from the ceiling. One of them crashed down right where she would have had to walk to reach the tunnel. Thyra realized with growing horror that the path to the surface was already becoming dangerous. Soon it would be completely blocked. Even if she could reach the surface, what then? The egg needed very specific conditions to hatch properly. It required the warm, humid air of the deep caves, surrounded by the energy that flowed through the crystal formations. Up on the surface, exposed to the harsh winds and cold of the mountain peaks, the youngling inside might die before it could be born. For the first time in centuries, Thyra felt truly helpless. She had fought space pirates and survived the extinction of her own species. She had seen civilizations rise and fall, watched stars be born and die. But now, faced with the choice between saving herself and protecting her unhatched child, she found herself trapped by forces beyond her control. The cave shook again, and this time cracks appeared in the walls. Thyra could smell sulfur in the air now, the scent of volcanic gases seeping up from deep within the planet. Time was running out faster than she had hoped. In desperation, she did something she had never done before. Dragons were proud creatures, used to solving their own problems and asking for help from no one. But pride meant nothing when her youngling's life was at stake. Thyra reached out with her mind, not just across the mountain or even across the planet, but out into the vast emptiness of space itself. She sent a telepathic call for help, broadcasting her desperate plea in every direction she could manage. She did not call for other dragons. There were no other dragons left alive as far as she knew. Instead, she reached out to anyone who might be listening. Any being with even a spark of compassion who might understand what it meant to protect something precious and innocent. The message was simple, but heartfelt. A mother in danger. A child about to be lost. A plea for help from anyone brave enough to answer. Thyra had no idea if anyone would hear her call, or if they would care enough to help if they did. But as another section of the cave ceiling cracked and molten rock began to seep through the deepest tunnels, she kept broadcasting her message into the void, hoping against hope that somewhere out there, someone would listen. Dave Sullivan was having the worst week of his life, and that was saying something. His cargo ship, the Lucky Break, had broken down 3 times in the past month. His ex-wife was demanding more money for their daughter's school fees. And now his latest shipment of medical supplies was 2 days late because he had taken a wrong turn near the Centauri cluster and ended up in completely empty space. To make matters worse, his ship's artificial intelligence was in one of its moods. Dave had nicknamed the computer Grumpy years ago, and the name had stuck. Today, Grumpy seemed determined to point out every single thing that was going wrong. "Dave, I feel obligated to inform you that we are now burning through our fuel reserves at an alarming rate," the AI announced in its typical dry tone. "At our current consumption level, we will run out of power in approximately 18 hours. I know, Dave muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. He had been awake for almost 36 hours straight, trying to navigate through a region of space that his outdated star charts barely covered. "Just keep us moving toward the mining stations. Someone there will sell us fuel. Assuming we reach the mining stations before we run out of power and drift helplessly through space until we die," Grumpy replied cheerfully. Dave's co-pilot, Rita Vasquez, looked up from the engineering console where she had been trying to fix their navigation system for the past 6 hours. Her curly black hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and there were grease stains on her work uniform. "Why do you always assume we're going to die?" she asked the AI. "We've been in worse situations than this." "Have we?" Grumpy asked. "I cannot recall a time when we were simultaneously lost, low on fuel, late for delivery, and completely broke." "There was that time with the space pirates near Rigel," Dave pointed out. "Ah, yes," Grumpy said, "when you tried to outrun 3 military-grade fighters in a cargo hauler, held together with spare parts and prayer. I had blocked that memory for obvious reasons." Rita snorted with laughter despite their situation. She had been Dave's co-pilot for 2 years now, ever since she had been laid off from her job at a major shipping company. Most people thought she was crazy for joining the crew of an independent hauler, especially one as unreliable as the Lucky Break. But Rita had grown to like the freedom of working for herself, even if it meant they were always one disaster away from complete bankruptcy. "Contact," Grumpy announced suddenly, its tone becoming more serious. "I am detecting an unusual energy signature approximately 2 light-years off our current course." Dave perked up immediately. Energy signatures usually meant other ships, and other ships might be willing to sell fuel or at least point them in the right direction. "What kind of signature? Is it a distress beacon?" "Negative. The signal appears to be, well, this is odd." For the first time in Dave's memory, Grumpy actually sounded confused. "The pattern matches several entries in my linguistics database, but the results are highly improbable." "What do you mean?" Rita asked, moving over to look at the sensor displays. "According to my analysis, the signal appears to be a telepathic communication broadcast in ancient Draconic," Grumpy explained. Dave and Rita stared at each other in silence for a moment. Then Rita started laughing. "Dragons? Seriously? Dave, I think your computer finally had a complete breakdown." "I assure you my diagnostic systems are functioning perfectly," Grumpy replied with wounded dignity. "I am simply reporting what the sensors detect." Dave frowned at the readouts. He was not the most educated person in the galaxy, but he had picked up enough random knowledge during his years of hauling cargo to know that dragons were considered mythology by most civilizations. Sure, there were stories about great reptilian creatures with magical powers that had supposedly lived on various worlds thousands of years ago, but those were just stories, weren't they? Play the signal, he said quietly. Dave, you can't be serious, Rita protested. We don't have time for this. We need to find fuel, not chase after fairy tales. But Dave was already reaching for the communication controls. Something about the idea of a distress call, even an impossible one, bothered him. During his years of carrying cargo between remote worlds, he had seen plenty of people in trouble. He had also been in trouble himself more times than he could count. He knew what it felt like to need help and have no one willing to give it. The signal came through the speakers as a low, humming tone that seemed to vibrate in their bones. But underneath the sound, Dave could swear he heard something else. Emotion, desperation, fear. Not for itself, but for something precious that was about to be lost. Grumpy's translation appeared on the main screen as text. Ancient mother seeks aid. Youngling in danger. Time grows short. Any who hear this plea, I beg of you, help preserve what cannot be replaced. The message repeated over and over, with slight variations each time, as if whoever was sending it was trying different ways to express the same desperate idea. It's coming from the Valdris system, Grumpy reported. Valdris Prime, to be specific. According to my records, that planet has significant mining operations. Rita was studying the star charts. Dave, that's completely off our course. It would take us at least 6 hours to get there, and we'd use up most of our remaining fuel in the process. Dave stared at the translated message on the screen. He thought about his own daughter, safely living with her mother on a colony world light years away. He thought about what he would do if she was in danger and he could not reach her. He thought about the note of pure maternal terror he had heard underneath the alien communication. Set course for Valdris Prime, he said quietly. Dave, Rita's voice was sharp with disbelief. Are you completely insane? We'll be stranded there with no fuel and no way to complete our delivery. The medical company will never hire us again. Maybe, Dave admitted. But if someone really is in trouble down there and we're the only ones who heard their call for help. He shrugged. I've made worse decisions. Name one, Rita demanded. That time I married my ex-wife, Dave replied without hesitation. Rita threw her hands up in the air. Fine. But when we're floating dead in space because we ran out of fuel chasing imaginary dragons, I'm going to haunt you for eternity. I will be sure to remind you of this conversation when we inevitably crash and die, Grumpy added helpfully. But even as they argued, Dave was already changing course toward the Valdris system. Something deep in his gut told him this was important. He had spent most of his adult life running cargo from one boring planet to another, never doing anything that really mattered. Maybe this was his chance to actually help someone for once. As the lucky break turned toward distant Valdris Prime, the desperate signal continued to pulse through space, carrying its plea for help into the void. Dave listened to it repeat over and over, and with each repetition he became more certain he was making the right choice. Rita might think he was crazy. Grumpy certainly thought they were all going to die. But for the first time in years, Dave felt like he was doing something worthwhile. He just hoped they would arrive in time to actually help. Valdris Prime looked like it was dying. As the lucky break approached the planet, Dave could see massive volcanic eruptions lighting up the dark side of the world like angry red eyes. Clouds of ash and steam swirled around the purple mountain ranges, and even from space, they could detect the heat signatures of lava flows cutting new paths across the surface. Well, this explains the distress signal, Rita said grimly, studying the sensor readings. The whole planet looks like it's falling apart. Multiple seismic events detected across all major landmasses, Grumpy reported. Volcanic activity increasing by the hour. I am also detecting several mining installations, but most appear to have been abandoned. Dave leaned forward in his pilot's seat, scanning the planet's surface for any signs of life. Can you pinpoint where the signal is coming from? The transmission appears to originate from deep within the largest mountain range on the northern continent, Grumpy replied. However, I should point out that landing on the planet's surface would be extremely dangerous given current conditions. How dangerous? Dave asked. On a scale of 1 to certain death, I would rate it as slightly worse than certain. Death, the AI answered. Rita turned to stare at Dave. Please, tell me you're not thinking what I think you're thinking. Dave was already starting the landing sequence. Someone down there is in trouble. We came all this way to help. I'm not turning back now. Dave, look at those readings. The whole mountain range is about to collapse into a giant lava pit. Whatever was down there is probably already dead. But the signal was still broadcasting. Weaker now, but still carrying that same note of desperate maternal fear. Dave could not explain why, but he felt absolutely certain that whoever was sending that message was still alive and still needed help. The lucky break shook violently as they entered the planet's atmosphere. The air was thick with ash and volcanic debris, making navigation nearly impossible. Dave had to rely entirely on Grumpy's sensors to guide them toward the signal source. Landing site located, Grumpy announced. I have found a relatively stable area approximately 1 kilometer from the transmission point. However, stability is a relative term given that the entire region is experiencing continuous seismic activity. They touched down with a bone-jarring thud on a rocky plateau that seemed to be the only piece of solid ground for miles around. Through the viewport, Dave could see that the landscape looked like something from a nightmare. Cracks in the earth glowed with internal fire and the air shimmered with heat waves. In the distance, several volcanic peaks were actively erupting, sending columns of ash high into the purple sky. Atmospheric analysis complete, Grumpy reported. The air is breathable for humans, though I recommend filtration masks due to ash content. Temperature is uncomfortably warm but not lethal. Radiation levels are within acceptable limits. Dave and Rita suited up in their emergency gear and grabbed portable scanners and breathing equipment. As they prepared to leave the ship, Rita grabbed Dave's arm. Promise me something, she said seriously. If this turns out to be some kind of trap, or if the situation gets too dangerous, we leave immediately. No heroics, no stupid risks, agreed? Dave nodded, though he had a feeling that promise might be hard to keep. They stepped out of the ship and immediately felt the heat hit them like a physical blow. The ground beneath their feet was warm enough that they could feel it through their boots. In the distance, they could hear the rumble of volcanic activity and the occasional crash of falling rocks. Following Grumpy's directions through their communication links, they picked their way carefully across the broken landscape toward the source of the signal. The terrain was treacherous, full of loose rocks and hidden cracks that glowed with internal heat. More than once, they had to detour around areas where the ground had split open to reveal molten rock flowing beneath. As they got closer to their destination, Dave began to notice something strange about the rocks around them. Many of them seemed to be made of crystal rather than ordinary stone. Some were perfectly clear, while others sparkled with internal colors that shifted as the light hit them from different angles. I'm detecting the signal source just ahead, Rita said, checking her scanner. It seems to be coming from inside that cliff face. Dave looked where she was pointing and saw what appeared to be a cave entrance, partially hidden behind a curtain of falling stones. As they approached, he could feel something that was hard to describe. A sense of great age and power, as if they were approaching something ancient and important. The cave entrance was much larger than it had appeared from a distance. Dave realized that something very big could fit through that opening. Something much bigger than a human. They stepped into the cave and Dave's breath caught in his throat. The cavern was enormous, easily large enough to hold several cargo ships. The walls were covered with crystals that glowed with their own internal light, casting rainbow patterns across everything. But what dominated the space was the creature in the center of the cave. Dave had never seen anything like it. The dragon was massive, easily 50 meters long from nose to tail tip. Her scales were golden but dulled with age and cave dust. Her eyes were large and intelligent, and they fixed on the two humans with a mixture of hope and suspicion. Between her front claws, sheltered by her massive body, was an egg that looked like it had been carved from living light. For a long moment, nobody moved. Dave and Rita stood frozen in the cave entrance, hardly able to believe what they were seeing. Thyra studied these strange small beings who had answered her call, trying to determine if they were friends or enemies. Then the mountain shook again, more violently than before. Rocks fell from the ceiling, and one of the cave walls cracked with a sound like thunder. Hot gases began seeping up through cracks in the floor, and Dave could smell sulfur in the air. Thyra made a sound that was part roar and part whimper. She looked down at her egg, then back at the humans, and Dave suddenly understood what she was trying to communicate. She was too big to escape through the cave entrance before the mountain collapsed, but the egg was small enough that humans could carry it to safety. "Rita," Dave said quietly, his voice filled with awe, "I think she wants us to help save her baby." Rita stared at the massive dragon and the glowing egg, her engineering mind trying to process what she was seeing. "Dave," she whispered, "that's not just an egg. Look at the energy readings." She held up her scanner, which was practically going crazy with readings she had never seen before. The egg was not just biological. Complex patterns of energy flowed through its crystalline shell, creating circuits and pathways that looked almost technological. Thyra seemed to understand that the humans were trying to help. She carefully moved one of her massive claws away from the egg, giving them a better view. The gesture was clearly an invitation, though Dave could see the fear in her ancient eyes. She was trusting complete strangers with the most precious thing in her world. Another earthquake shook the cave, stronger than the previous ones. This time, a section of the ceiling collapsed entirely, blocking part of the entrance they had used to get in. Dave realized they were running out of time very quickly. "We need to move now," he said, stepping forward toward the egg. The moment he got close, Thyra's head whipped around to stare at him. Her eyes were larger than Dave's entire torso, and he could see intelligence there that was older and deeper than anything he had ever encountered. For a terrifying second, he thought she might attack him. Instead, she spoke. The words came not through sound but directly into his mind, in a voice that felt like distant thunder and flowing water. "Small firebearer," she said, using words that his mind somehow understood even though they were not in any language he knew. "You came when I called. Why?" Dave swallowed hard, trying to find an answer that made sense. "Because you needed help," he said simply, "and because no parent should have to lose their child." Something in Thyra's expression changed. The suspicion faded, replaced by something that might have been gratitude. She lowered her great head in what Dave somehow knew was a gesture of respect. "The youngling cannot survive in your cold ship," she said, her mental voice filled with worry. "It needs warmth, moisture, and the energy that flows through the deep crystals. Without these things, it will die before it can break free of its shell." Rita had been listening to this exchange through their communication link, since Thyra was broadcasting her thoughts to both of them. "Wait a minute," she said, pulling up schematics on her portable computer. "Dave, remember what the lucky break used to be before you bought it?" Dave's eyes widened as he understood what she was thinking. "A colony transport ship, with a full medical bay." "Exactly." Rita was already running calculations on her computer. "The medical bay has environmental controls that can adjust temperature, humidity, atmospheric pressure, even electromagnetic fields. If we can figure out what conditions the egg needs," Thyra's head rose with sudden hope. "You have such capabilities?" "Truly? We can try," Dave said. "But we need to get the egg to the ship first, and we need to know exactly what conditions it requires." Thyra began sharing information with them, flooding their minds with knowledge about draconic physiology and the complex process of egg development. Rita frantically took notes on her computer, trying to translate ancient biological concepts into modern technical terms. The egg needed to be kept at precisely 37 degrees Celsius. The humidity had to be exactly 73%. But most importantly, it needed to be surrounded by a specific type of electromagnetic field that mimicked the energy patterns found in deep crystal formations. "I can rig the medical bay to handle temperature and humidity," Rita said, studying her notes. "But electromagnetic fields, I don't know if our equipment can generate the right patterns." "Show me," Thyra said. Somehow, the dragon was able to project her consciousness along with them, as they mentally returned to the lucky break. Through their shared connection, she examined the ship's medical systems with an intelligence that made Rita feel like a beginner engineer. "Your healing machines use similar energies to what the youngling needs," Thyra said with growing excitement. "The pattern is different, but it can be adjusted. See here and here?" She began showing Rita how to modify the medical equipment, combining draconic knowledge with human technology in ways that should have been impossible. Working together, they developed a plan. Dave would carry the egg, which was surprisingly heavy but manageable for a human. Rita would run ahead to the ship and begin modifying the medical bay according to Thyra's instructions. The dragon would use her remaining power to hold the cave together long enough for them to escape. But as they prepared to put their plan into action, the mountain shook with the most violent earthquake yet. Lava began seeping through cracks in the cave floor, and the temperature started rising dangerously. "Go!" Thyra roared both mentally and aloud. "I cannot hold this place together much longer." Dave carefully lifted the egg in both arms. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. The moment he touched it, he could feel the life inside, somehow aware and reaching out to him with trust and hope. Rita was already running toward the cave entrance, her computer in one hand and her emergency toolkit in the other. "The entrance is almost completely blocked," she called back. "We'll have to squeeze through." They made it out of the cave just as another section of the ceiling collapsed behind them. Dave could hear Thyra roaring in pain as falling rocks struck her, but she was still holding back the worst of the collapse to give them time to escape. The journey back to the ship was a nightmare of falling stones, rising heat, and ground that shifted beneath their feet with each earthquake. Dave clutched the egg protectively, trying to shield it from the ash and debris falling from the sky. Several times they had to take shelter behind large rocks as volcanic bombs exploded around them. When they finally reached the lucky break, Rita immediately ran to the medical bay while Dave secured the egg in a temporary holding area. Through their communication link, they could still hear Thyra's mental voice, growing weaker but still providing guidance on the technical modifications they needed to make. "Hurry," the dragon's voice whispered in their minds. "The youngling stirs. It will try to hatch soon, whether the conditions are right or not." Rita worked like someone possessed, rewiring medical equipment with combinations of technology and intuition that should not have worked but somehow did. Dave helped where he could, but mostly he found himself talking to the egg, trying to reassure the life inside that everything would be all right. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Rita finally activated the modified medical bay. "Environmental controls are online," she announced. "Temperature and humidity are at the right levels. Electromagnetic field generators are, well, they're doing something that looks like what Thyra described." They carefully moved the egg into the medical bay and sealed the chamber. Through the transparent walls, they could see the egg's glow intensify as it responded to the artificial environment they had created. "Is it working?" Dave asked anxiously. His answer came not from Rita but from Thyra's mental voice, now filled with relief and gratitude. "Yes, small fire bearers. The youngling feels the proper energies around it. It grows calm and strong." But their relief was short-lived. Through the ship's sensors, they could see military vessels approaching the planet. The Galactic consortium had finally arrived to investigate the seismic disturbances, and Dave had a sinking feeling that they would not be happy to find humans interfering with whatever they considered their territory. The egg began to crack, just as the first consortium ships entered orbit around Valdris Prime. Dave and Rita watched in amazement as hairline fractures appeared across the crystalline surface, each crack glowing with internal light. The energy readings from Rita's scanners were going completely wild, showing patterns she had never seen before. "Something's happening," Dave whispered, pressing his face against the medical bay's viewing window. Inside the chamber, the egg was pulsing more rapidly now, its glow shifting from blue and green to brilliant white. Then, with a sound like breaking crystal mixed with a bird's first song, the shell began to split apart. What emerged was unlike anything Dave had ever imagined. The hatchling was clearly a dragon, but not entirely. It had the basic shape that Dave expected from the stories he had heard as a child: 4 legs, wings, a long tail, and a reptilian head with large, intelligent eyes. But instead of regular scales, parts of its body seemed to be made of the same crystalline material as the egg. These crystal patches pulsed with soft light, creating patterns that flowed across the youngling's skin like living circuitry. "Rita," Dave said quietly, "are you recording this?" "Every second," she replied, her voice filled with awe. "Dave, look at the energy readings. This little guy is somehow interfacing with our ship's systems." She was right. As the hatchling moved around in the medical bay, the lights in the chamber began to respond to its presence. The environmental controls started fine-tuning themselves automatically, adjusting temperature and humidity to levels that were somehow more perfect than what Rita had programmed. Then the hatchling looked directly at them through the viewing window, and Dave felt a gentle presence touch his mind. "Hello," the youngling said, its mental voice bright and curious. "Are you my second parents?" Dave's heart melted completely. "I think we might be," he said softly. The hatchling's joy was infectious, radiating through their mental connection like warm sunlight. But the moment was interrupted by Grumpy's urgent voice over the communication system. "Dave, we have a problem. 3 consortium military vessels have taken position around the planet. They are demanding that all unauthorized ships surrender for inspection." Rita pulled up the sensor readings on her computer. "Those aren't just inspection ships," she said grimly. "Those are military research vessels, the kind they use when they find something they want to study." Through their connection with Thyra, they could feel the dragon's ancient knowledge stirring. Images and memories flowed into their minds, showing them glimpses of what had happened to other rare and powerful creatures when the consortium found them. Research facilities, experimentation, lives spent in captivity for the sake of scientific advancement. "They cannot have the youngling," Thyra's voice said firmly in their minds. "It is more than just my child. It represents something new, something the galaxy has never seen before." "What do you mean?" Dave asked. More images flowed into their minds. Thyra showed them the history of dragons, how they had once been the guardians of countless worlds, using their natural magic to protect and nurture life throughout the galaxy. But as technology advanced and civilizations became more mechanized, the dragons had struggled to adapt. One by one, they had faded away, unable to bridge the gap between the ancient ways and the modern universe. "But this youngling is different," Thyra explained. "It is evolved to work with both magic and technology. It can interface with your machines while still carrying the wisdom of the ancient ways. It is what dragons were always meant to become." As if to prove her point, the hatchling suddenly began interacting with the ship's computer systems in ways that should have been impossible. Lights throughout the lucky break began responding to its emotions, growing brighter when it was happy and dimming when it was concerned. The engine started running more efficiently, as if the youngling was somehow optimizing their performance. "Grumpy," Dave called out. "Are you detecting any changes to your systems?" "This is highly unusual," the AI replied, and for the first time ever it actually sounded excited rather than pessimistic. "The young dragon appears to be enhancing my processing capabilities. My computational speed has increased by approximately 300%. "How is that possible?" Rita asked. The hatchling looked at her with bright, intelligent eyes. "Your thinking machine wants to work better," it said simply. "I just helped it remember how." Before anyone could ask what that meant, alarms started blaring throughout the ship. "Consortium vessels are moving to intercept," Grumpy announced. "They will be in weapons range in approximately 10 minutes. Dave felt a surge of protective anger that surprised him with its intensity. He had known this little dragon for less than an hour, but the thought of anyone taking it away or hurting it filled him with fury. "We're not letting them have Spark," he said firmly, surprising himself by giving the youngling a name. "Spark?" The hatchling's mental voice was delighted. "I like that name. It fits with all the pretty lights." Rita was already working at the navigation console. "Dave, there's no way we can outrun military ships in this old cargo hauler. They're faster, better armed, and they have us completely surrounded. But we're not just a cargo hauler anymore, are we?" Dave said, looking at Spark through the medical bay window. "Not with our new friend helping us." Spark seemed to understand what he was asking. The youngling placed one crystalline claw against the wall of the medical bay, and suddenly the entire ship began to hum with new energy. The lights grew brighter, the engines sounded stronger, and every system began operating at peak efficiency. "Dave," Grumpy said, its voice filled with something that sounded like wonder, "I believe I can now do things I was never designed to do." Through the viewing ports, they could see the consortium ships approaching. But Dave no longer felt afraid. He felt something he had never experienced before. The certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. "Thyra," he said, speaking to the dragon's mind across the distance, "we're going to get your child to safety. I promise." "I know you will, brave firebearer," Thyra replied. "You carry more than just my youngling now. You carry hope for a new future." As the lucky break prepared to face 3 military vessels with nothing but courage, compassion, and the help of a newly hatched dragon who could somehow bridge the gap between magic and technology, Dave realized that his boring life of hauling cargo was officially over. What came next was going to be much more interesting. The first consortium ship opened fire without warning. Energy beams that should have torn the lucky break apart instead struck some kind of shimmering barrier that surrounded the cargo hauler like protective wings. What the hell was that? Rita shouted, checking her instruments frantically. Through the medical bay window, they could see Spark glowing brighter than ever, its crystalline patches pulsing in rhythm with the ship's defensive systems. The youngling had somehow created an energy shield using nothing but its natural abilities and the ship's power grid. Defensive barriers at 100%, Grumpy announced, and Dave could swear the AI sounded smug. The young dragon has integrated itself with our defensive systems in ways that should be impossible, according to every law of physics I know. The consortium ships regrouped and attacked again, this time with coordinated fire from all three vessels. But the lucky break danced between their attacks with grace that no cargo hauler should have possessed. Every movement was perfectly timed, every turn exactly right. Spark was not just enhancing their systems anymore. It was somehow helping to pilot the ship. "How are you doing this?" Dave asked in wonder. "Your ship wants to fly better," Spark replied happily. "And the angry ships want to hurt us, so your ship wants to not be where their firelights are going to be." It was like the youngling could sense the intentions of the consortium vessels and predict their attacks before they happened. Combined with the enhanced engine performance and improved navigation systems, the lucky break was becoming something entirely new. But Dave knew they could not run forever. Eventually more ships would arrive, or they would run out of fuel, or something would go wrong. They needed a permanent solution. "Thyra," he called out mentally, "we need your help."
"Can you still reach us from the planet?"
"The mountain is collapsing around me," the ancient dragon replied, her mental voice strained with pain and effort. "But yes, I can still touch your minds. What do you need?" "We need to go somewhere the consortium can't follow us. Somewhere safe where Spark can grow up without being hunted." Images flowed into Dave's mind. Thyra was sharing her ancient knowledge of the galaxy, showing him hidden places that existed between the well-traveled space lanes. Dead systems that appeared empty on official charts but actually contained worlds where life could thrive. Ancient dragon refuges that had been forgotten by the younger races. "There," Thyra said, highlighting one particular system in Dave's mental map. 7 jumps from here, in a region your people call the Dark Nebula. A world where crystal formations grow wild and free, where the energy patterns are perfect for dragonkind. I have not been there in 1,000 years, but it will be safe. "But what about you?" Dave asked. "We can't just leave you to die in that collapsing mountain." Thyra's mental laughter was warm but sad. "Dear Firebearer, I'm already dying. I have lived far longer than any dragon was meant to live, sustained only by my need to protect the youngling. Now that it is safe, I can finally rest." "No." Spark's voice cut through their mental conversation like a crystal bell. "Mother who came before you cannot leave. I need you to teach me the old songs and the deep magics. And I will," Thyra said gently. "But not in the way you think." Something incredible happened then. Even as the consortium ships continued their attack and the lucky break continued to dodge and weave through space, Thyra began to transfer something to her youngling. Not just knowledge or memories, but some essential part of herself. Dave could feel it flowing through their mental connection like liquid starlight. "Every dragon who ever lived leaves their wisdom behind for the next generation," Thyra explained as the transfer continued. "I am giving Spark not just my own knowledge, but the accumulated wisdom of all dragons who came before me. It will take time for the youngling to understand all of it, but it will be there when needed." The transfer finished just as Valdris Prime's largest mountain range finally collapsed entirely. Through the ship's long-range sensors, Dave watched massive volcanic eruptions tear apart the region where Thyra had made her home. The ancient dragon's mental voice grew faint and distant. "Go now," she whispered. "Take my child to safety, and remember, both of you, that you are no longer just human and dragon. You are something new together, something the galaxy needs." Her presence faded from their minds, leaving behind only warmth and gratitude and a deep sense of completion. Spark was quiet for a long moment, processing the vast amount of information it had just received. When it spoke again, its mental voice was older somehow, touched with ancient wisdom while still maintaining its childlike wonder. "I understand now," the youngling said. "We must go to the crystal world, but not just to hide, to build something new." Dave looked at Rita, who was still working frantically at the navigation console while consortium energy beams flashed past their viewport. "Can you plot a course to Thyra's coordinates?" "Already working on it," Rita replied. "But we'll need to make several jumps to get there. And those ships are going to follow us." "No, they won't," Spark said confidently. The youngling reached out with its enhanced abilities and somehow touched the computer systems of all three consortium vessels at once. For a moment, the attacking ship stopped firing and hung motionless in space. "I told their thinking machines to forget they saw us," Spark explained, "and I asked them very nicely to go look for something more interesting somewhere else." The consortium ships turned away from the lucky break and began heading toward a different part of the system, apparently convinced they had been chasing sensor ghosts all along. "That," Rita said in amazement, "should definitely not be possible." "Lots of things are possible when you mix old magic with new thinking machines," Spark replied cheerfully. "Mother who came before showed me how." 3 days later, the lucky break dropped out of hyperspace near a blue-green world that sparkled with crystal formations visible even from orbit. The planet was everything Thyra had promised and more. Vast crystal forests covered entire continents, and the energy readings from the surface showed patterns that would allow Spark to grow and develop its unique abilities. But more importantly, as they established their new home on the crystal world, Dave and Rita began to understand what Thyra had meant about building something new. Word of their rescue had somehow spread through underground networks across the galaxy. Other people who had been dismissed as crazy began coming forward with their own stories of impossible encounters and ancient mysteries. A former military pilot arrived with evidence of other dragon eggs hidden in remote locations. A xenobiology researcher brought data about creatures that seemed to combine organic and technological elements. A computer programmer showed up with an AI that claimed to remember being something else in a previous existence. Within a year, their hidden sanctuary had become a research station where the boundaries between magic and technology were being rewritten. Spark, growing rapidly in the crystal-rich environment, served as both student and teacher, learning human science while sharing draconic wisdom with anyone willing to listen. Dave found himself transformed from a failed cargo hauler into something he had never expected to be, a bridge between worlds. Rita discovered that her engineering skills were perfectly suited for developing hybrid technologies that combined the best of both organic and artificial systems. And throughout the galaxy, stories began to spread. Stories of the Dragon Whisperers, humans who had saved the last dragon and discovered that the line between magic and science was much thinner than anyone had believed. The future was going to be very different from what anyone had expected. And for the first time in his life, Dave Sullivan could not wait to see what happened next. As he watched Spark teaching a group of human children how to communicate with their ship's AI using a combination of telepathy and computer programming, Dave smiled and thought about Thyra's final words. They really were something new together, something the galaxy needed, and they were just getting started.